So, Brian, I now would like to just ask some questions specific to your book. And again, we'll share that link with our listeners in our show notes. But, your book does highlight 5 high AQ practices that distinguish expert communicators. Could you briefly walk us through these 5 practices?
Yeah. So the first practice is provide 6 answers, and it's really be able to provide 6 answers, but provide the best singular answer. So, for example, if I go to the convenience store and I ask the convenience store clerk, how do I find a Mars candy bar? What I'm really looking for the convenience store clerk to do is give me a procedure. The 3 steps: go down this aisle, take a left, bottom shelf, grab the candy bar. I don't want a story about Mars candy bar. So it's sort of that spirit. If you are talking to someone, they're asking you a question, what is the singular best answer you could provide? That's what high AQ practice 1 is. And we all appreciate that when we're talking to someone and we ask a question, we get that answer that we're looking for, that answer type. So that's practice 1. Should I move on?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
So everything builds off practice 1. Practice 2 is answer twice. So for important why, what, and how questions, you want to answer twice to sort of appeal to the logical side of the brain and the emotional side of the brain, subjective side of the brain. And the AQ circle, it's a framework. There's answers on the left side, theory, concept, procedure, and answers on the right side, story, metaphor, action. So I've already given you the example of leadership, right? Where I said it's about inspiring others, holding them accountable, and then the metaphor of the 2 ropes. So if you answer twice, you're providing both answers seamlessly in one utterance. And that's going to sort of, trigger both sides of the brain. So the idea with the answer twice is you want to do it for emphasis. If someone doesn't understand something, or when there's a very key point you want to make, but you don't want to do it for every answer because you'd be droning on. So that's answer twice.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just move on to the next one is answering complements. So that's the idea that certain answers in combination will best fit each other. So an example there would be if someone listening is in mentoring training, I could define what mentoring is. You might have an implicit or explicit question. I could say, mentoring is helping others to become their better future selves at work. It consists of career support, social support, and role modeling. And you may logically say, wow, that's a great answer, right? And I could elaborate a little bit more and define each of those pieces. But then in a conversation, you're likely to move to adjacent answers. So you're going to say, wow, so I understand what social support is, but how do I provide it to my mentee? And it's next to each other on the circle. So it's adjacent. And I might then proceed to give you an example of how to provide social support. I would say, here's a 3-step procedure for social support. Step 1, you have your door open. Step 2, someone comes in. Step 3, you ask them if this meeting will take less than 5 minutes. If so, you meet. If not, you schedule some other time. And the whole point of that procedure is it's very consistent with social support, unlike task support, because when someone's in pain, let's say you come to me and you're in pain emotionally, it's like a fire that you need put out right away. And if we don't meet right away, then it's going to fester in you. So that's an example of how you progress in conversations using complements. So that's high EQ practice 3. High EQ practice 4 is style. So in my aforementioned example, if I'm working with an operations person, they're probably going to want practical answers. Those are procedures and actions. So regardless of the questions being asked, at a higher base rate, I'm going to be more focused on procedures and actions if that's the style they prefer. And there's 3 styles in total. There's practical, procedures, and actions. Analytical is concepts and theories. We've all been around those big thinker types that like that. And then relational is stories and metaphors, connecting to emotions and experiences. So what Answer a Style is saying is you can profile individuals, profile yourself, profile others, and you want to sort of provide answers that are consistent with the styles they prefer. And the final high EQ practice is answering context. And that's all the answer types, all the question types we just went through are going to vary depending on the context potentially. So simple example, if I'm interviewing for a job at a bank, all else being equal, a story about me working in a bank is going to be best. If I'm interviewing at a bakery, a story of me working at a bakery is best. So this sort of takes it to the next level where you go from checkers to chess when you consider the context. So those are the five practices, and I know it's a lot. So hopefully everyone could follow that sequence. And visuals will help. I know you'll have it in the
Yeah.
story notes, some visuals of the wheel.
Yeah, and this is good. And Brian, I'll leave it up to our listeners to purchase your book or to contact you. But in summary, those five AQ practices were: number one, provide 6 answers. Number 2, answer twice. Number 3, answer in compliments. Number 4, style and profile individuals. And number 5 was answer in context. And I think what we're saying here is AQ can be learned, right? You have to be deliberate
Yes.
and intentional, and it takes practice. But AQ, answer intelligence, can be learned by following this framework.
It can. And I wonder if I could just lead into this for your audience. It's a skill.
Yeah.
I think a lot of what you see with communication is not a skill. A skill is a complete framework you can operate within. So even something like nonverbals or empathize with someone or active listening, I think these can be mapped to AQ, but by themselves, they're not a framework. And I think the parallel, if I could paint this metaphor for your audience, I'm from Chicago, so I'll preface this, is take basketball. You can score in different ways in basketball: jump shot, 3-pointer, layup, right? And those are all like the different answers you can use, the different high EQ practices. These are techniques you can use. And you could potentially get to the highest levels, college or MBA, if you're like a 3-point specialist. So for your listeners, that might mean someone's really great at stories, and one of the answer types. But if you want to be at the highest level, you have to have command of all the answer types, of all the high EQ practices. And this is where I get to Chicago. Take Michael Jordan. When he started his career, he was great at dunking and, close to the basket. Then he developed the mid-range shot and 3-pointers and turnaround jumper. Well, guess what? At the end of the day, he could communicate, not communicate, he could score in every way. And that's analogous to, communicating every way, using all the practices, having that kind of skill. And that's basically the extended metaphor there. I think your audience might appreciate that.
Yeah, no, that's good. So maybe, you talk about real life examples, right, in your book from renowned organizations like Salesforce and Boston Mutual Life Insurance, for example. Can you provide our listeners with some additional insight there on how have these entities leveraged AQ for better outcomes? Can you maybe share a bit of a case study summary?
Yeah, I'll maybe just give you 2 examples.
Sure.
One is from the chapter on sales, and it's co-authored with individuals at Gong and Salesforce. And we looked at Gong's data for sales. And what Gong does is they record sales calls. And one thing we found was that, or they found, I think it's consistent with AQ, is that effective sellers had balanced conversations. They spoke about equally with each side. They asked and answered questions about equally. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're trying to strive for here with AQ. We've done a lot of emphasis on the answer side, but it's really mapping of questions to answers. And as a straw sort of person framework for AQ, effective conversations are like a great dinner conversation. Think of a dinner conversation with a friend. It tends to be balanced. Both sides speak about equally. Both sides ask and answer questions about equally. Both sides care about each other. And that is the same conversation in every other arena, I think. Leadership, sales, it's about balanced. So really what we're advocating here is a very common sense approach, which in the case of Gong's data is supported in sales. Effective conversations are balanced. Both sides speak about equally. Both sides ask and answer questions. And that's what we're really looking to elevate with AQ is there's a lot of focus on questions, but now we add answers, do it both, and have these balanced conversations, and you're going to be more effective. That's one example. And I'll just transition to the second example. This is from the book with Boston Mutual Life Insurance, a longtime client of mine, and co-authored the book with the CEO and the chief communications officer. And in this book, and many of those listening today are thinking about their culture, right? We brought that up before. Well, Boston Mutual wanted to enhance their culture, and they decided to do it sort of using AQ. And where they started from was this idea that they wanted to have a strong family culture. And in similar ways, other organizations are going to key into things. I mean, family sort of makes sense of the insurance industry. But as we got into it in AQ terms, they hadn't really wrestled to the ground what all the answers were. And I'll give you an insight. For example, take the concept of family. That may seem kind of boring, but we connected it back to families that survived the Great Depression. Those families had three attributes. They were flexible, they were cohesive, and they communicated well. Now that's powerful. As opposed to, we're a family in some diffuse way. They've defined it as a strong family, broke it down to those dimensions, and now as you connect that to different answer types, like say a procedure by which a customer service team is going to do their work, they're connecting back to those principles and saying, how do we do customer service that's cohesive, that's flexible, that we communicate well? And that one answer helped unlock other answers. But in similar ways, what we find with individuals that don't use AQ is they have these singular answers that are incomplete, and they don't know how to connect it to other answers. But using AQ, they're able to develop all their answers for culture. And what it meant to them at the end of the day was, they were living the brand, and they were communicating it in terms of questions and answers internally and externally. And it just really transformed how they embrace the culture. So that's the second example.
Great examples. So I think what I'm hearing you say, Brian, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I also think the chapters in your book, cover some of these, I guess these various forms of AQ, right? So I just heard you in the previous response, you talked a little bit about maybe sales AQ, or maybe leadership AQ, or maybe there's a such thing as customer service AQ or coaching AQ. Can you provide for our listeners, and again, maybe a sneak peek into your book, but how AQ can be tailored to different professional scenarios exactly? Because I think what you just described is a couple of different categories of practical use, maybe.
Yeah.
Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I think a good way, another metaphor. I like to use metaphors. I like to eat my own dog food, as they say, or try to. But think of AQ as a container. So a container that can hold any topic. And then you have the liquid contained, the actual topic itself. So if you're someone that's interested in leadership or culture, what that is the liquid that's poured inside of the container. And what I'm getting at here is that every topic can be navigated with these questions. So let's take leadership. If you're a leader, you need to ask and answer basic questions. What is leadership? Why do I lead? How do I lead? And you need these answers. But where everything gets contextualized is that the specific answers vary depending on the context. So you take sales, a procedure might be the funnel, right? That's very different than a procedure of doing mentoring. So every person that's coming to AQ with different disciplinary backgrounds has unique answers that they can put into the framework and use it to help them navigate the conversation. So that's essentially the way AQ works, is that there is a framework that's consistent across topics, but the answers will be unique, oftentimes and different within a topic. So it's up to those professionals or experts to sort of pour their content into the framework. And that's when it really comes to life.
Wow. Good stuff. So Brian, I think in my view, obviously frameworks are as good as their application, right? I guess I would say. And so, for me, I think it's clear why you provide in your book an AQ self-assessment, right? But I think that's because, as you just mentioned, Brian, that AQ is a skill that can be developed, right? It takes intent, it takes development, it takes reflection. But can you tell our listeners more about how they can most effectively benefit from your AQ self-assessment?
Yeah, so I think the self-assessment it's a very basic test. It's about question and answer mapping. It's sort of analogous to that, convenience store clerk. You ask the convenience store clerk, how do I find the Mars candy bar? And if the convenience store clerk was taking the assessment, they might choose procedure as the appropriate answer. So there's a series of questions, and you have to map the appropriate answer to the question. And the questions are derived from AI. They're generated by AI. And then when you're done, you get a score, 0 to 100%, and the average score is about 50% correct. And then there's a report that'll lay out these high AQ practices, and basically the first level of AQ is recognizing that there are answer types they map to questions and sort of paying attention to it. And then from there, there's other aspects of the skill that can be layered on top of it. But this is like an introductory test that usually points out to people that they've never really thought about this question and answer mapping, and it deserves their attention.